right. Hi.
So what do you find?
Thank you guys so much for coming to our third speaker panel of this semester. This one is probably my favorite. I vouch for this, and I asked to be the MC of this. And it's a consensus debate. I really like kind of having this format of having two perspectives giving their opinions to why they are, why they chose one or the other. And obviously, when we say proof of work versus proof of stake, these protocols and what they're representing, they're not implementing it. They have their own variation of it, right? But it's just to kind of have a higher level discussion of what is the difference in these two forms. But I want to first intro by saying, what is a consensus mechanism? I know a lot of you guys here, come to our meetings and you have a basic understanding of it, but I want to make sure we all have a level playing field before we go into the discussion. And the simplest way I can describe it without spending too much time is that with a blockchain, you can think of it as a network, and people are open to join, right? But with that, we're wanting to kind of vote on what block gets added to this network. And different ways that you can do voting is with proof of work and proof of stake. But what these are just what kind of the more formal term of it is a Nakamoto consensus mechanism, which just means that you're going to put up some type of resource in order for you to be able to vote. And this is different than what a lot of other types of consensus were done in the past, where it was just, you raise your hand if you're part of some organization or a party and stuff like that. But with proof of work is just saying that the resource that you're going to put up in order for us to know that you are an actual human and you can't just rig the system is your computational power. So that's a lot of you guys hearing about how much energy Bitcoin and other proof of work consensus mechanisms take. And that's also, you have to account for the cost of buying those computers and everything like that. And then proof of stake being that instead of you having to actually buy something in the physical world, you just stake the digital currency. And that's really meaning that however much digital currency you have, you can put into kind of this wallet, and however many coins you lock into that wallet, that is kind of like your verification that, yes, I am actually, I'm an individual and I have the right to vote in this. That's a high level. I could have done a better job, but I won't hold us any longer. So today, we're fortunate enough to be joined by 5 different protocols companies to just kind of, because we don't want to get into the realm of with Gary Gensler and having everything being called a security, I'm just gonna refer to everything as an organization here, just to keep it pretty simple. But first, the way we'll do this introduction is I'm going to introduce one of the speakers, and they're going to answer 2 questions. The first one is just to introduce their organization that they represent and give a brief description of what they do. I'm hoping to get a bit of a little bit more description than just their title. And then the last question is, from a philosophical point of view, why does decentralization matter? And to start with, I will have a list here a certain way. We'll start at the end. So we're joined today with Max. He's a developer evangelist at Hiro, and he's going to be representing Bitcoin, and I'm going to be on the proof of work side. And Max, if you want to just introduce the organization.
Yeah, happily. So Hiro, formerly known as Blockstack, Public Benefit Corporation, or PBC, made Stacks, the blockchain 2019 in its release, and it extends Bitcoin functionality by creating what we call a smart contract layer on Bitcoin. From the ground up, it's built to interact very closely, intimately with Bitcoin. And I'm a developer evangelist, is someone who slightly different roles and responsibilities, even with the same title, but at Hiro, what it looks like is I work with external developers, both already building on Stacks and then people that are interested and make the case for why tapping Bitcoin liquidity is a great idea, why building on this blockchain is a good idea. And also I take all of the feedback that they have and I bring it internal to our team. And I say, this is what the developers out there feel like. This is the pain points. This is what's really hard for them to do. Could make that easier. This is kind of feedback loop of information. And then the philosophical question
is why does decentralization matter?
So it's been really hard for me to keep this concise because I would totally go off on this subject. But decentralization is a way to describe something. So it's an attribute of a system it's kind of valueless. But there are some things that may lead to maximizing a certain value if that system is more decentralized. It could be anything from this is like a really contrived example, but something sinking, if there's more decentralization, maybe there's a greater resistance to it floating into the water, to human systems where you have a bunch of people that have local knowledge, local resources. They have a picture of their world, just like what you are best at. You have your own personal view of what your skills, knowledge, and ability is, and someone else doesn't. You have better access to know your own local environment better. It might be better for a system where those decentralized people get to make decisions on their own, for instance. So it's to say, but there are other things that maybe centralization is better for. But so decentralized monetary assets, there's a case to be made that might be really worthwhile. But I'll stop there because again, I could go off.
Thank you. And next we have Ken. He is a senior software engineer at Near Protocol, representing Proof of Stake team. If you just want to give us an introduction of what Near is.
Sure. Hey everybody, I'm Ken. So I work at the Near Foundation. It's layer 1 proof of stake blockchain. So I work at the Near Foundation, whose goal is to accelerate the growth of the Near ecosystem as well as Web3 in general. I would say my day-to-day, what I do is I work kind of like what Max said, but I work with different teams trying to build on Near, trying to help them integrate and build on top of our protocol, as well as I build internal tools and do some D&D for projects that are looking for either a grant or to do a service agreement, etc. And then why decentralization is important. Decentralization, I look at it a little bit, if I were to simplify it, as optionality. The idea behind some of these Web 2 organizations is they try to make their service or platform really sticky. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. You want your data there. And the idea behind decentralization in the Web3 world is that you can opt in and opt out, take all your data with you, take your resources with you.
I love it. And next we have Dave. He is Director of Blockchain Strategy at Tron, representing Proof of Stake. If you just want to give us an introduction to what Tron is.
Sure, yeah, glad to. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here tonight. So Tron DAO, we are, really when you think about it, we are a diversified Web3 company. We have a layer 1, a side chain, cross chain, an NFT platform, GameFi, and we also have a stable coin, and we have a significant stable coin trading business. So we have over 118 million accounts. There's probably 75 million or so accounts that hold Tron. Block height is about 44 million. Approximately 25% of all stablecoin volume flows through the Tron network each day. So we're fairly large. We're a top 10 smart contract platform. And what I do is I'm actually the Director of Ecosystem Development. So right now, our ecosystem development group has 3 different teams, so to speak. One focuses on growing our community, reaching out to developers and key opinion leaders and people like that. They're very active on social media. We have another group that focuses on what I'll call the emerging space. They work with new companies in DeFi and NFT and GameFi and all that kind of thing. Talk to a lot of wallets and all those things. And then where I spend most of my time is working with what I call traditional companies or TradCo to help them better understand the use cases for blockchain as well as get them onto the Tron network. I also work with research groups and incubators around the country. And philosophically, what do I think of decentralization? So think about this. Some of you have probably taken a history class at some point. So in the 1960s, there was a lot of social protest, social movement, and a big slogan then was power to the people, right? They wanted to take power from corporations and from government and give it back to the people. that same concept is essentially what blockchain does for technology, right? It's able to take power away from the centralized corporations and governments and give it back to the individual creator. And that philosophically, I think that's why it's important. That's why it's important to me. Everyone has their own reasons. So I'll stop there.
And last but not least is Alan. Alan is the CEO of Dominant Strategies, also the organization that runs and develops Quai Network. He'll be representing the proof of work. And a big shout out to Alan because he's actually the founding president of Texas Blockchain. So
Hey.
that's why we're here. But if you want to intro us into what is Quai? What is Quai?
Yeah, thank you, Efremov, for the intro. So a little bit more about myself and Quai Network. As he said, founding president of Texas Blockchain. It's good to have the home field advantage here on this panel, and it's good talking to everyone today. My background was UTCS, graduated 2020, was always working on blockchain research and how to scale blockchain technology. I was very fortunate enough to collide paths with Professor Efremov and start to develop how to scale these technologies and find the right balance between decentralization and scalability. Out of that research here at UT, kind of birthed Quai Network and BlockReduce. So Quai Network is essentially a proof of work 2.0 solution. We use merged mining, which is the idea of mining many different blockchains at once to create a more scalable and decentralized sort of blockchain network without having to fall into different trade-offs or pitfalls of existing technologies today. A lot of the history actually dates back to Bitcoin and Namecoin. And if you look at how other blockchains had merged mined onto Bitcoin, we sort of took that idea, admitted our own layer 1, and then considered that proof of work 2.0. In its current fashion, my sort of role as CEO of Dominant Strategies is developing Quai Network. I spend a lot of time as a core developer working on the protocol. I also spend a lot of time in the community, sort of building projects, building applications, and then other sorts of initiatives that kind of all fall under the same umbrella. In terms of the decentralization argument, I think decentralization is important for all of the items they mentioned. It is definitely taking power back to the people, but it's also something so fundamental in the way it's formed in regards to being similar to language, or being similar to information on the internet, or being similar to just the way people can talk and interact. We see languages sort of have emerged to be these decentralized things that morph over time, and banning a blockchain network or banning an organization, as Arma likes to say for SEC purposes, we are sort of limiting the ability for people to take back that power. And banning that protocol would be the same as banning a certain type of speech, or banning a certain type of book, or banning various ways that people can transact and communicate. And so with blockchain networks, I find decentralization very important purely because money should be separate from the state in a very similar way that church has been separated from state and our current government, our current structure. And by bringing that power back to people, as you said, blockchain technology enables that.
Okay, so first let's give them a round of applause. I wanted to start the conversation by having them give their perspectives on why decentralization matters and also what the organization does, so you guys understand their background. But let's get into the fun part of why we're here. We call this a debate, but really it is a discussion. There is no right, I don't think there is a right answer because of how early we are, but we do want to explore both sides and give each of them an opportunity to argue their point of view. And so my job here is just to help guide the conversation. I will pose a question, but I really encourage that once kind of the floor is open, you guys are able to just kind of chime in, ask each other questions, and keep it going, and I'll make sure that we stay on time. But the first question, and this is going to be posed for the proof of stake team, is what is wrong with proof of work? Why did proof of stake come to be?
Can I just before we that feels like that in some ways that's kind of topical, and like I feel like everyone kind of would immediately be able to jump into that conversation. But I just wanted to add a little bit to like at the very top you described like why are we here, what is a consensus mechanism, and I just want to like just nail the point that consensus mechanism is a way to arrive at a source of truth. I'm sorry, like a thing that we trust. And we can either do that by trusting a whole bunch of individuals or like organizations. And I mean that not blockchain related. I mean literally like we trust humans that have banded together to do a thing. And what Satoshi Nakamoto innovated was, what if we got rid of trust entirely and we made it such that a record of truth was created through cryptography, that in order to corrupt, what if we made it computationally infeasible to do so? So that is the replacement for trust. Is that like, well, I trust it because for someone who manipulated it, they would have had to have, at current day, done a 50% plus one attack on the Bitcoin hash, which means controlling a lot of decentralized people. And that was the innovation. And so I just want to make that point clear and that's the classical proof of work consensus mechanism that powers the Bitcoin network. And then the innovation later has come with proof of work. And so I just wanted to kind of nail that point. Kind of that's the starting point, proof of work. Making it computationally infeasible to mess with that record. Because we know that if someone messed with it, that would mean that they basically took, all half of the computing power of Bitcoin and somehow appropriated it to themselves, which is just impractical. World governments can't even do that.
But that, I'm glad you already came to defend, but I want to let Ken and Dave take the floor. So I'm posing this question for them and giving you an opportunity to follow up after once they've presented their points.
Yeah.
But again, the question being, everything you said was great about proof of work, but what is wrong with proof of work?
Yeah, I think that was a good way to scope it. I think, when Satoshi wrote that paper and implemented Bitcoin, definitely a huge technological advancement. And there's a lot of debate right now, should you win a Nobel Prize? How do you give it to a synonymous person? But it's definitely a huge technological innovation. I think the cons, or the reason that other consensus mechanisms have been explored, is really twofold. One is energy consumption, and two is scalability. So it kind of boils down to that. I think Bitcoin has been a great success. It's been, created a ton of value, had a bunch of different amazing use cases all over the world. But, even though I think you can make a valid argument that other financial instruments also, waste a ton of energy, just to say that, the other side is also bad too, doesn't make it a good energy option. And then on the scalability side, if you're competing with other financial vehicles, you need to compete with Visa or MasterCard or the credit card companies that process I think they can do something along the lines of 12 million per second. And so to get to that scale, different mechanisms have been explored.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's energy and it's scalability. Those are the two things that are mostly, I don't want to say wrong because that's not the right word. Those are the two things that limit the greater use of proof of work throughout the world. It doesn't mean they're wrong. So right now, when you look at kind of the blockchain world and who's using what, 9 of the 14 largest blockchains in the world are proof of stake or some derivative of proof of stake. So we're delegated proof of stake. So when you think about that, think of it as a balance sheet. That's a point in time. It's not going to be like that forever. Something else will come along and replace proof of stake. It'll be better, faster, everything. It might be radio waves or electricity, who knows? It'll be something. But for right now, proof of stake is the dominant consensus protocol in blockchain, and I think that's because people have found ways to scale it as best as possible at this point in time, and it consumes less energy than anything else right now, or at least anything else that's commercially feasible. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. On the 9 out of 14, if you look at the numbers, it's easy to say that proof of stake is the overwhelming sort of protocol implementation of what's being used today. But the majority of market cap is still under proof of work coins, albeit Bitcoin here, and being the number one currency. So if you look at how the market caps and who holds the currency, what they have trust in, the trust is predominantly in a proof of work protocol to secure their funds. In terms of the sort of environmental concerns and the ways to mitigate a lot of that, everyone likes having their lights on, and everyone likes having their hot showers and various things that kind of power day-to-day life. If you look at Bitcoin miners, and if you look at the hardware intensity that goes into that, there's real-world ways to make sure all of that mining is done in a sustainable fashion and actually incentivizes renewable energy. It's one of the main kind of environmental drives that's happening here in Texas in particular. And if you look at West Texas, you have these miners going out to these very low-cost energy areas in order to make sure that the lights are still on and that you still have your hot showers whenever the power grid is down here in Austin. And we've seen this in a very real-world example. And so over the summer, we actually had heat waves where the grid would have gone down if the miners didn't use their off-peak energy and sell it back into the grid for a cheaper price, because it was more expensive, or they made more profit doing that as opposed to mining Bitcoin. So having that for renewables and having that be sort of a sustenance mechanism for them to smooth their sort of profitability is very important, and I think a very real-world use case for proof of work. So the energy argument to me is sort of a justification for proof-of-stake protocols to say, oh hey, energy is bad, we don't want to be a pro-energy economy, we just want to try to use as little energy as possible and not try to optimize anything. In terms of scalability, if you look at the merge in particular, a very successful event, monumental. You know, I hold Ethereum, a lot of people do, and I think it's a very important technology. But in terms of scalability, when Ethereum switched on the merge, TPS didn't go up, and miners weren't able to process more transactions. There's fundamental bottlenecks in regards to how many transactions can be processed. If we ever want to get anything near Visa and MasterCard, that isn't a consensus mechanism. So to say we exist in this plane of choosing between these, we have to do something completely different than switching who gets to vote on what and who gets to canonicalize the chain. And I think from those two standpoints, it's hard to differentiate something that's trusted and true as proof of work.
Yeah, I agree with you on proof of work. I think proof of work will lead to greater ideas in energy, greater use of renewables, greater use of all kinds of things, and it will become efficient. But I disagree on the market cap. Ethereum is still the largest even after the merge. Bitcoin technically is the largest, but people generally don't build on the Bitcoin network. They don't use proof of work.
I think
commercially,
you might be just like mixing or confounding like the different use cases. Maybe like DeFi, for instance. There's like very little like classically on Bitcoin, even though Bitcoin is like one of the largest asset classes is collateral, bridging, etc. But the use case of like store value, it is absolutely Bitcoin dominates.
Yeah, but Bitcoin is the store value. There aren't you don't see new DeFi companies starting building on proof of work.
But Ethereum was proof of work. And so if you see all the same DeFi companies that started on Ethereum, and Ethereum's best argument to every other proof of stake protocol is always going to say, we're the best proof of stake because we work proof of work. And they use that argument to say we have the best proof of stake mechanism because we've had such good supply distribution by using proof of work, and our coins have been able to be effectively non-KYC'd and entered into the network and done in a highly distributed way, in a competitive way, to where our proof of stake's the best. And if you talk to anyone in the Ethereum ecosystem on proof of stake, they'll say that. And so to say, okay, we can't use that because they're not innovating, because there's no innovation happening on proof of work, that's what the whole ecosystem has been this time up until about 2 months ago.
We will never get anything like the level of decentralization of Bitcoin.
That's true.
So,
and when you evaluate networks, I think you really have to come at it from the sense of the trilemma. So, is everyone familiar with that? All right, so security, scalability, decentralization, right? The classic thing was you pick two, right? You can't have all three. And proof of work, I think, really epitomizes that, in that it's super secure, it's decentralized, but you can't scale it. And then I think proof of stake at this point is kind of the most reasonable trade-off to be found at this point in time of blockchain evolution.
Right. A reasonable, I guess by your standards, but I mean, like dollars, but like market cap, people voting in the decentralized manner is like what's best for that.
Yeah.
It's clearly value is being scored.
Well, and all right, there's buying Bitcoin as a use case, which is a great use case. Bitcoin's my favorite cryptocurrency, right? And it is a store of value. But then there's developing a company. So if you guys are developing a company on here, probably a lot of you have projects going on. What chain are you going to use? You're going to be thinking of, you're going to go use what you see in the news, Polygon, Avalanche, Tron, Ethereum, right? You're gonna go build on one of those chains. You're not gonna say, hey, I wanna go build on the same network as Bitcoin, because, most likely, no one is doing that. And that's it's nothing away from Bitcoin. I love proof of work is great, revolutionized the world. And I wish everything could be as decentralized as that, but we're not there yet. This is an evolving space. And right now, proof of stake is very popular, but that doesn't mean it's always going to be popular. Something else will come along and replace it.
Insert the trilemma. So trilemma is, again, not in regards to consensus mechanisms. So if you look at decentralization, decentralization is, again, a gradient of how many nodes can effectively run this software. If you look at Solana, Solana's proof of stake, they are extremely centralized. What does centralization do? It introduces points of failure. All it does, going back to the earlier point of decentralization being kind of like a big float of how many people can be on the raft at once while maintaining certain levels of scale. You can't use Solana because there's a small little raft and it goes down every so often. Why? Because there's central points of failure, and with those small node counts, there's not a high level of robustness. Because they also gate it off in various ways. And so if you look at proof of work, anyone can come and go into the system as they please. It doesn't matter how much hash rate you're contributing, it could be next to nothing, but at the same time, I can spin up my computer and run it, and I don't need to go to Coinbase and buy some other currency and then have my information on Coinbase so that I can participate in the network. That level of freedom is extremely important and exists completely out of the triangle. Because the triangle, again, if you want to prioritize scalability, you have to do something completely different than switch out a consensus.
Just to follow up real quick. One, I think it's funny how this turned into a fashion salon.
Everyone has a good fashion.
But like on the topic of decentralization, I think that one is really interesting between the proof of work and some of like the classic chains and some of the newer ones. I think they started in the decentralized, whereas most of the other chains have raised money and we're trying to decentralize over time. So I think both of those are really, I think it's a very interesting debate, and I don't know what the right answer is to achieve long-term decentralization. I think that's I would say a hotly debated topic. In terms of security, I think that's the really major trade-off I see with the consensus mechanism side of things, and decentralization too. You're gating now by computational power, and with proof of stake, you're gating by, basically, financial restrictions, right? You need X amount of dollars to become a node in most chains, most proof of stake chains, and now you're gating by, your monetary assets. So that, I think, is your trade-off there, where you get, where you're having both with decentralization and security with the trilemma. But I will say, to achieve full scalability, you do need a lot of other things besides proof of stake. However, I feel like most of the kind of cutting edge research or most of the kind of innovation there has been on proof of stake chains and what's involved in proof of stake.
Because proof of stake was a grift for the longest time for new chains. And so you could go sell a shiny new consensus mechanism. And with the age of proof of stake with Casper, Gasper, all of the Ethereum research, and then huge shout out to Near because they beat Ethereum to it. They really did. They said, here's all this research. You guys are up in the air doing your thing now. You can't innovate it because it's hard to move something in flight. And then Near shipped first. So I will say props to that. But it's ultimately this technology will advance in phases, and it will continue to phase in and phase out. And as someone who's been in this space since 2016, I've seen how things have gone and how they're going to continue to go. Right now it's ZK and optimism, fraud proofs. People want to scale with layer 2. There's still a lot of work to be done on the layer 1. And so why can't we go create more data availability at the L1? Why can't we go create more execution shards at the L1? Why can't we process more at the L1 before we start going into all of these other mechanisms? And I think for proof of stake, the chains that were launching then figured that was a must-have. And it was if we're launching a new chain, we want to try out this new VM, we want to go WASM, we want to do this interesting architecture with how we process transactions in parallel, and we want to do this interesting thing, and we're going to launch a new chain, we have to be proof of stake because there was a stigma at the time around proof of work. And if we see that in retrospect, I think we would have seen a different thing play out where a lot of the chains potentially could have been proof of work that had launched in the 2016 to 2019 era.
Sure. I think there's a stigma, but there's also reality to it, certainly on the scalability side. I mean, that's not a myth. It's true. So, I think...
But how does being proof of stake make you faster?
It is. I mean,
How?
it's.
There's
I don't know how,
an
but it is.
improvement overhead in proof of stake whenever you have to aggregate signatures across everyone on the network. That takes time. So if you want Ethereum and every proof of stake network as exists is a sort of non-deterministic thing that happens for everyone to go get all of the signatures, and it takes network overhead. So technically, the Ethereum network after the merge was slower to some degree, kind of very minimal percentage, but it was inherently slower. With proof of work, it's instantaneous across whoever decides to mine the longest chain, and then things are sort of fought and resoluted. And yes, the fork choice rule in regards to how things are happening with reorgs and rollbacks is not as kind of seamless as proof of stake, because again, it is this kind of probabilistic thing that happens across the network. But to say one is faster than the other for scalability purposes, I think is inherently wrong. If you see for everyone wanting to do faster chains today, it has to be multi-chain architecture, and it has to be many shards operating in a seamless fashion. And I think proof of stake networks were the first people to sort of innovate in that area, and I will give them credit for that.
So talk about play in terms of the trilemma.
Quai. So Quai, we can solve the trilemma by having that execution sharded network. So we have many chains all working together, and we can use merge mining to create a seamless multi-chain bridge.
Explain merge mining.
So merge mining is the idea of taking a header, and you can combine a header from many chains and mine that. So if you look at the OG example with Bitcoin and Namecoin, people would say, hey, I'm mining Bitcoin, but if I mine Namecoin as well and combine these two things, I can get a little bit of Namecoin on the side for free because I'm already mining Bitcoin.
And Doge, right? Doge?
Yeah. Doge was, Litecoin also had some merge mine aspects to it. Stacks is kind of considered pseudo merge mine into various, into Bitcoin as well. But
I just want to be sure, are we losing anyone? Can we check in? Or do we assume that everyone knows?
So with merge mining, you're essentially at no cost using the same hardware to benefit another chain. And so what old proof of work chains would do is they're going to say, hey, we want to bootstrap our network and get this additional security on launch. So we're going to have ourselves be merge mined with Bitcoin because all these Bitcoin miners are going to mine us, and we're going to have a lot of security, and it's going to be great. And so with Quai, what we've done is we've taken our own layer one, and we've had this multi-chain approach. So if you think of sort of Cosmos, Polkadot, Avalanche subnets, and this multi-chain architecture of how things are sort of ad hoc across the various set of nodes. We've taken that with Quai and have created many different chains that can have a header that's merged mined so that they share security, because the miners are going to mine many of the Quai chains and give them sort of equivalent security while creating more block space and more transactions that can be processed across the different chains.
So do you use the same mining equipment that's built now, or do you need your own specialized mining?
So today, if you look at Quai, we're going to be using GPUs in the beginning, and our algorithm technically is Blake 3. Blake 3 is a more parallelizable algorithm. Blake 3, as it exists today, is implemented in a few newer blockchains, but technically it's very similar to a SHA-256. For an ASIC, you would have to sort of develop directly to the Blake 3. So if people wanted to use their SHA miners, they couldn't just turn everything off of Bitcoin and then go to Quai. There isn't an ASIC that exists today for Blake 3. So
it is or it's not?
There's not one. So I think it's actually a really interesting market to launch new proof of work coin in, because that I think was a huge fear for proof of work chains is if I spin up a new one, everyone from Bitcoin and the GPUs from Ethereum are going to come attack me and reorg me, and exchanges are going to be afraid to list it because they're going to get double spent if they don't have some depth. So for Quai, being in this area of a potentially new ASIC to come on the market and provide security in the short term, and then long term let that progressive decentralization sort of occur with new ASICs coming in the market, it's a pretty unique game.
So what is the energy consumption?
Sorry, I'm gonna cut it off.
I would consider us carbon negative if you have roadmap ability to scale in methane mitigation and capturing methane from landfills.
Okay.
And so if you take any of that, and Bitcoiners is saying the same thing, anyone doing the proof of work chain is going to say we're going to go after all these ways to mitigate methane, and we're going to go after all these ways to make us carbon negative. Yeah. Cow farts, man. We're going to stock them up. But in a realistic way, what you do is it's a very technical thing. And you go to landfills and you go to these distributed and decentralized pockets of methane that exists because people use waste. They throw away their trash. They do compost, and that gets driven out to West Texas again, or those places kind of in the armpits of the world. And when it sits there, it decomposes and it creates methane. And if you look at the actual numbers from the EPA, the methane that's emitted contributes 11% of the U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. it is more detrimental than CO2 because whenever methane is in the sky, it's 75 times more dangerous and more sort of.
But you're not talking about change. You're talking about something completely different.
Let's
No, but it's relevant.
let's-
because you're asking
let's
from an
move
energy
on.
perspective, what is proof of work doing? And that's what's the first thing you said was important.
You could use it for the server power proof of stake too. You could use that method.
How? Well, why would you go put proof of stake?
So then you can use it to
on a
power something else too, and then the world will do that.
But there's no incentive, because to have the incentive, you actually have to get an economic return from using that energy.
We could give them economic return.
But how do you do that?
I don't know. Start a program.
Start a program, but how do you do that on chain to ensure that they're being per hash or per contribution allocated?
Prove that they're generating energy through this format.
Okay, I would love to. So you plug your computer into a wall, and then you turn it on, and it's going to cost some kilowatt per hour to run and do hashes.
Yeah.
It's math.
Yeah, same
So, just,
But then you're doing proof of work.
you know, we at Tron were very interested in what the environmental impact of our network is, because we are very large. So we had a study done earlier this year, and as it turns out, Tron's probably one of the most sustainable blockchains in the world. A fraction of Bitcoin, a real fraction of Bitcoin. Maybe I think the metric is maybe the global use is, or the annual use is that of 15 US households, which is nothing for a blockchain our size. So as you think about your impact on the world and what you want your company to have and be associated with, I think Tron is a great choice for that.
Can I respond to this?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Are you responding to me or to the
I think this like we can't use energy, it's bad, look how little energy we use, is like it's just an incomplete statement. Like more energy is used rendering and distributing and watching YouTube and Facebook than all of Bitcoin mining. Is that a waste? Is that like a bad thing that people are watching YouTube and Facebook? No, it's like people like that's what energy is for. Like we harness like the world's bounty and turn it into preference satisfying things. Like there's a kind of a hate on Bitcoin. I feel like relative to like all the other categories of energy use. And the thing is if you were to tell me that for the cost of whatever the Bitcoin hash cost is, that I get a decentralized store of value, I think that's a great deal. I think that's a great bargain. I'll buy that all day. Like I think it's worth it. So the idea that we need to like maximize or kind of go to this like completely like useless list of energy, well then why don't we go back to the Stone Age where we have no goods and services, we don't do anything. That's functionally the QED of like a logical extension of we shouldn't use energy.
I completely agree with you. I'm a long way from an environmentalist. But people like that right now. That's what's hot. We didn't change anything in what we did. We just wanted to understand where we stood, right? Or understand what our impact is. And now that we know, it's very low, and people love it.
I think
it really actually attracts a lot of people to the network.
I think that also the age, or like, and I could be wrong, but the age in which we could actually be bootstrapped a lot of value that is the economic. The reason that ETH is worth, however much it's worth, and it's you need 32 ETH in order to run a proof of stake validator. The reason it has any value at all is because of proof of work. That was the computational resources turned into economic assets and are now basically pre-bought cycles on the Ethereum virtual machine. It got value because of the proof of work being done, and also we rode this we will never ride this. We will never be given this gift again. Where we got all of the decentralization that we got. I don't think that we could ever do that again. I think proof of stake just kind of had its moment. Ethereum captured is most decentralized. It kind of bootstrapped its value, and now its stake is actually worth something and it's decentralized. I don't think we can do that ever again. And so, for me, the argument is a little bit kind of null and void. We have the best proof of stake chain, and we have a proof of work chain, and let whatever the use cases that people want to build on them be used. I don't, for instance, see a future where people are going to be making everyday transactions on the Bitcoin network in 100 years with a 500,000 or whatever US dollar Bitcoin. There's a whole use case and expression of that chain, and then if there's other proof of stake chains, etc. I'm kind of rambling now, but I think
I think we definitely stretch that conversation with one question and a lot of other questions.
Oh, there's more questions.
But I do want to open it up to the floor to pose a question for them to kind of go on with it.
I was going to ask, is ETH truly decentralized?
Now, no,
Why?
because it's censorable. And if you look at the mechanism in which Ethereum right now is being attacked, it's through OFAC compliance and the ability to sanction the chain. And the inherent fee sort of revenue model right now is through miner extractable value, and all miner extractable value is essentially optimizing for OFAC compliance, because the way in which people are validating the network are through these MEV relays, and MEV relays inherently have OFAC compliance built in.
While that's true, I think in a perfect world like Bitcoin, you don't necessarily need to think about regulatory compliance. In the real world, for a chain to be adopted, for blockchain to become mainstream, it has to comply with regulations. I think it really scares most regulators, most governments, because it's out of their control. So how do they begin to limit it, to put constraints in? They have to put in all these guardrails to try to limit what can be done. And that's, unfortunately, I'm no fan of government either, but unfortunately that's going to be how it is.
So then you're no better than PayPal. PayPal just put the $2,500 restriction on accounts, and if you say something wrong on Twitter, they're going to ban and freeze your account.
Yeah.
So if I'm right now using a blockchain and I say something wrong on Twitter, they're like, that's, you have a wrong opinion, or hey, you voted for this person, or hey, you tried to send money back to this sanctioned country because your family's there, they can just freeze your funds.
So you're going to go to market with the slogan of, how do you say it,
Why?
Quai Network, we don't have regulatory compliance?
No, I don't think that's something you advertise, but I think it's you are creating a free market, and you're creating. If you looked at what China did with Bitcoin, they banned hashing, they banned mining in China. All the miners came to Texas. That's a decentralized market. If you freeze money in an exchange on Coinbase, whenever the Ethereum merge happened, everyone's like, my funds are going to get slashed because Coinbase doesn't vote on the right chain. I'm losing my money, and I'm losing my yield, which is the important part of proof of stake chains. And so, no, of course you're not going to say we're this, wild west of everything happening, but at some level you want to give users their freedom. And I think you have to have those liberties in the system to give users their freedom.
So to go back to the question, I think there's a lot of different types of decentralization, right? You have like your development decisions. Is that decentralized? Is that going to be organized by like a voting mechanism? Your just organization itself, right? Your blockchain. So this is somewhat of a cop-out answer, but I think the Ethereum ecosystem has a little bit of both in there. And then it also, I think, what was alluded to previously, there is, I think it's been obvious that there has been some censorship on the Ethereum blockchain. Tornado Cash was, the US government was able to shut it down. There's a variety of other different use cases, and some of the largest applications that are built on Ethereum also have some pretty heavy centralized components to them, which add to the centralized nature.
So you guys brought up the importance of like freedom and decentralization, and these are very important ethoses for like Web3 native people. But you guys also mentioned that blockchain is moving in waves. So when we finally get to the mass adoption wave, I have two questions. Do you think the ethos of decentralization will apply to the common person, and how do you think it'll resonate with them, or do you think it matters at all? The second question is, how are you guys positioning yourselves, with your respective blockchains to drive that mass adoption?
I'd like to start off by saying, really, I'm sure everyone's heard the phrase that decentralization doesn't matter until it does. And then all of a sudden, like whatever value they're putting on decentralization shoots up. So you can imagine it's just a future where people are caring less and less and less. I mean, totally is the case already. People care less and less about decentralization. And then, for whatever reason, like some right is taken away from you, Bitcoin's going to be there. And I think people are really, really happy that option is there for them. So I think it's impossible to say on any one day in the future, what will people value decentralization. And I can imagine maybe for a while, common man be more or less indifferent. But and there's a long way to get there. But I can see a world where all of a sudden it becomes really, really valuable.
Yeah, I think decentralization, long term, is super, super important, right? I think everyone, it's very interfaced some of the problems with Web 2 and these, large Web 2 companies. However, long term, I do think that we want the end user and the developer, everyone using blockchain, to be abstracted away from it. It's kind of like an inherent component of the blockchain, but you don't need to be like, I don't know, it doesn't need to be in your face that like it's decentralized. Like, I don't think that's super important.
Yeah, and so if you look at the Tron website, it says right on the front, decentralize the web. That was the original goal, that's still the goal, and it will continue to be the goal. How do you perpetuate decentralization? I think you have to do, or one of the ways you can do that is by making blockchain accessible to more people, right? So what makes it more accessible? One of the things that makes it more accessible is cost, right? So it's very expensive to transact on Ethereum, at least in the prior proof of work. It's also probably relatively expensive to transact on the Bitcoin network. So if you can make the cost to access a blockchain and the cost to build a project very low, or as low as it possibly can be, that's making a blockchain more accessible to more people, furthering decentralization, and that's part of what we're doing at Tron. And we just became the official blockchain of the country, Dominica, and don't laugh, that's a country. And we did so because not Dominican Republic. There's another country. I had to look this up. It's called Dominica, which it's a real country. They have a flag, everything. But part of the reason why they've selected Tron is because of the low cost.
Yeah, and I think as you have us all sit up here and talk about the differences, at the end of the day, we're all going to go home and be in the same boat of trying to further the space. So as fun as it is to debate everybody, we're actually all on the same team. And if you look at how we can go to market and talk to people that are potentially, fighting against us for getting blockchain adoption, or not aware of how to use blockchains yet, or are even unaware that it's a coming trend, we have to really further education and further the implementation and how easy it is to use these technologies. I think the ecosystem today around the EVM is really, really advanced and really easy for people to just spin up a smart contract and deploy it. I think platforms like Polygon are going after this different approach of having all the big enterprises saying we're all going to make it and Web3 is the best and NFTs and JPEGs, like that's great. And then in the back door, it's like a Trojan horse of like, hey, you're in the blockchain ecosystem now. You have all this power. Recently, you saw Reddit NFTs sort of catch fire, and everyone on Reddit was dunking on NFTs for the longest time. And then the second they were in the crowd, they were like, NFTs are great, and you don't come into our, exactly, yeah, they're like, don't come into our ecosystem, these are NFTs. And so you're going to see slowly all these people get red pilled and being like, wow, this is actually a new trend, and I think everybody has that blockchain moment where they're like, wait, this is different. And ensuring that more and more people over time do that, and we hit that inflection point, and we trend with a similar growth compared to Web 2. And if you look at sort of internet users over time, and then social media users over time, and television users over time, it all trends in the same way. And I think blockchain is on that arc right now. I think crypto in general is on that arc right now, and innovations will continue to happen in the space. And particularly at Quai Network, what we're doing is trying to take a different approach just with the proof of work protocol again, and then seeing how we can fundamentally make that easier and more sustainable for the long term. And having a very unique and sort of individualized approach, if you look at the architecture, as opposed to being in that same bucket as everyone else, sort of taking that same architectural approach. So for us, we're all on the same team again on the narrative, but there's different flavors of doing it. You can always look at different stories in the past and technology. The best technological solution may not always win. It might just be the one that was first, or the one that did something different, or they had a really great business development team, or they had a really great other sort of use case. And so ensuring the next billion users get to use crypto, I think it's inevitable, and it's just a matter of when.
Yeah, to build on that just a little bit, like that's such a, to hammer that home, like if you're in Web3, we're all together. Good news for any single chain is actually, I think, as of right now, good news for its competitors as well, right? We don't want bad news, the same thing.
Anchor protocol.
Okay, right? They hurt everybody.
As long as Elon tweets about Doge, we'll be good. I don't care.
It's the balance between decentralization and user experience. that's I really think the trade-off here, because like if you think about a completely decentralized world, right, where everyone, think about like a completely decentralized government, every individual has to vote on every individual topic that's being debated. You know, not feasible, nothing gets done, it gets bogged down, right? That is kind of like a microcosm of some of the decisions on how decentralized you want your organization or blockchain to be. And what is really important is this like, the usability of that. So the example that we use at Nearlot is like, okay, your banks, they control your passwords and that's how you recover everything, etc. But you still have this recovery optionality. You know, with Bitcoin and with a lot of chains, right, you lose your private key. You know, something like billions of dollars lost every year from lost private keys. It's somewhere, I think, in the middle is the sweet spot where, you know, you have your own keys, you're in control of everything, but there's an optionality for recovery or, right, giving another key to someone else for like maybe read-only access, etc. It's that middle ground.
Vitalik has a great piece on like social recovery, where I can't do it justice, but it talks about like methods of recovering your key, where like certain X number of other people that you pre-verify, if they all agree, then they can recover your key.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's built into Near.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm a big Web3 auth shill. They have a really good
Yeah.
SDK for having like a Twitter sign-on, and then like they use the mirror signatures to then actually break up the keys across your OAuth. It's really cool. So it's just like a wallet feature.
I think just looking at each chain, which right now, in a macro sense, which dApps are you looking to build on your chains? Is it a specific vertical, or are you looking to just expand on which applications have already been built on? What's kind of your plan right now on the macro sense to onboard those billion users?
yeah, those are sorry, because actually I haven't talked about I haven't talked about stacks much at all. And Hiro, which was called Blockstack, but then we don't own the chain, so we ran into Hiro, but it's a layer 1.5, we sometimes call it. So it's a blockchain built on top of Bitcoin, and the consensus mechanism is called proof of transfer, where the stacks miners are actually sending Bitcoin. There's two participants, there's miners and there's stackers, STX stackers. If you stack your STX, you claim a chain tip. That's one part of like how which is a valid chain tip is decided. And then the miners, what they do is they spend Bitcoin. That is our consensus mechanism, is they send Bitcoin to the stackers. The stackers also designate the BTC address. So our STX users earn a Bitcoin yield. The miners send the Bitcoin, and then through a random lottery function, one of the miners like also gets to mint the block. Anyway, what we're really excited about, I mean, it's a fully featured smart contract layer with all the apps, DEXs, money markets, bridges, etc. But the thing we're really excited about is the synthetic Bitcoin asset that we are kind of creating a protocol around to create called SBTC, like Stacks BTC. If executed, which is our full on approach, full on dream, the whole entire ecosystem is behind the effort. It will be the most decentralized synthetic Bitcoin asset. So synthetic Bitcoin, unless you're working on the Bitcoin application, you are typically using a synthetic Bitcoin. Wrap BTC, have you guys heard of the Wrap BTC? That is an ERC20 token that exists on the Ethereum network. There's a centralized custodian, BitGo Trust, that manages a bunch of Bitcoin addresses and a bunch of Ethereum addresses. You say, I want to wrap Bitcoin, you send 100 Bitcoin to BTC, to BitGo Trust. They're going to mint 100 of these wrapped Bitcoins and send them to you. But it's a company and like centralized, and it's kind of embarrassing a little bit. But SBTC will be like a protocol-wide, like a threshold signature, peg in, peg out. It's a really incredible system, and we believe it'll be the most decentralized synthetic Bitcoin asset, so that your Bitcoin will be earning like native Bitcoin yield, and it's kind of like the closest to the ethos of Bitcoin that's like decentralized, and also, I think I got it across. So that's something we're really excited about.
Yeah, cool. So let's see, what are we? So I think for us it is a little broad, but like what I've heard some of our leadership say is there's like a top-down and bottom-up approach where it's like we're trying to integrate with like really large Web2 companies that already have an existing user base, get them on here, and then likewise on the other side, like try to build new applications that need decentralization and need Web3 to enable those applications to be built. Personally, I'm only, one part of a really large ecosystem. I'm really excited about some of the open source infrastructure and tooling that is getting built. Some of the stuff that I like, kind of like secure by default user experiences where like, you're not, I don't know, like you can't embed JavaScript into any near application or something like that. And then expanding our developer tooling, not only from a tooling perspective, but just programming languages. Like right now we can do JavaScript and Rust, but ideally in a little bit, like any programming language you want to use, we should be able to build smart contracts and interact with Neuron.
Yeah, so I believe your question was, where does the next leg of adoption come from, or wave of adoption come from? I think it's all coming from traditional companies. They're going to move, you see it now, they're moving into the space. Financial firms are developing tokenized assets. The trade was just done today, we're talking about today, between JP Morgan and I think the Bank of Singapore, or Monetary Authority of Singapore, something like that, and they built that on Avalanche and Polygon. That's what they used to do that trade. You're going to continue to see growth through capital markets. Outside of capital markets, it's going to be NFTs and metaverse that are going to drive adoption throughout retail, fashion, and into consumer goods. So those are the drivers. That's going to be the next wave. I mean, there might be a unicorn here or there, but for mass adoption, it's going to come through traditional companies using these technologies.
If the world needs more of something, it would definitely be more decentralization in social media. So starting there, seeing apps get built from the ground up with that in mind. I think we've seen a lot in the media, on Twitter, Facebook, and all these people, and having them move in to this space. I think that is the fundamentally wrong approach, just because they're so archaic and slow, and you're not going to be able to move quickly at such a high level. If you look at Facebook in particular, their stock has taken an absolute beating as they moved into the metaverse space. You don't know what that means. But they've now launched NFTs on Polygon. You can buy and sell, do things like that. I don't think that's the key to mass adoption. We've seen Coinbase get absolutely wrecked as they tried to move into the sort of NFT marketplace as well. These offerings continue to fail, and they continue to not gain various forms of traction at large-scale companies. And there's also a big sort of cost to entry and barriers because you don't want to be the first person to fail in that space. I think we saw a lot of the enterprises catch wind of this with supply chain being the big thing in 2018. We're going to put the supply chain on the blockchain, and it's going to be great. And we're going to put healthcare on the blockchain. We're going to put all these things on the blockchain. And you had like IBM Hyperledger and all those permission chains all doing that same kind of arms race. But I think social media is the one thing that I think is lightweight enough to start with and easy enough to build a small working ecosystem and then create a strong economic model, strong incentive model, and then have that kind of catch fire. The second would be micropayments and payments in general. Crypto was built to be this monetary solution from the core ethos of it, and having micropayments be easy to use, maybe in games or maybe in apps. That way you can start with crypto, or buying things without having to feel like you're sort of getting watched over by Big Brother and having your economic record to have the world view. And I think blockchain right now is actually really bad at that, because if you look at Ethereum, I can see everyone's net worth on Ethereum in a heartbeat, and it's all easily viewable. And so when people say the blockchain is this obscure thing and it's the very shadowy area of centralized finance, I think it's inherently wrong because it's the most public record to date, and it's the most easily viewable thing. And so blockchains need to advance a bit more. They need to be faster, cheaper, easier to use, more decentralized, all those things that we talked about. But then creating those key use cases on the consumer side so that people want to use blockchain payments in a very easy way. And I think that's the key part.
That was a great question. And to end things off so we don't linger, I want to pose one last, and I call this like doomsday. You probably heard something very close to this. With my executives, I like to ask, okay, whenever we have an event coming up, what are the absolute worst things that can happen that's going to hinder or stop us from having a successful event? So I want to ask y'all, what is going to stop blockchain from getting to the point where you envision it to be? Like, what are the big roadblocks that we have to overcome in the future?
stopping it.
I think that's even more so because people can move. So the freedom of information, I think if the government really took a strong approach to limiting information and being in a very totalitarian society that did that, I think from a market standpoint, we've gone through the ringer this cycle. We've seen a lot worse, and it feels very much reminiscent of 2018. So I think crypto's taken its beating. I'm no savant in that regard, and I'm not a macroeconomist, but I think in general, a doomsday event would just be like a CBDC coming in and being this fake crypto, and then kind of making everyone think that, yay, we're happy in this land of blockchain, and it's not really.
Yeah, just if you have one takeaway, CBDCs are evil. Don't
Don't go
go.
Yeah, but I mean, that would still be blockchain. So like, I think, yeah, I think at this point, it's garnering enough adoption where like, it will probably be part of the future no matter what. But I think the main thing kind of slowing down adoption is like the user experience, I would say. And then I do think, yeah, if it were to really change as we know it right now, it would be CBDCs. And like the Fed would try to, gain control over technology.
I have a little bit of like a black pill kind of view on it that I actually think it's going to be a while until we see like some kind of hyper Bitcoinization future, or like some like chain where like Bitcoin's price actually breaks free of kind of correlation with the S&P 500 and actually an inflation hedge. I just think that like, because no one actually wants to spend a Bitcoin. Like, I don't want to spend my Bitcoin on like Starbucks. It's like so which means that like the payments and micropayments claim, which I believe like also should be way better. User experience is really bad. Like losing your password. Try to imagine like asking your uncle at Thanksgiving like his comfort level with like a wallet and like buying things every day. It's like we're really far away from like a big mass market appeal, and so we're just kind of in this like weird period where like I think Bitcoin, like I think these people are still hodling, waiting for like a big future, and the payments experience is really bad. So it's really hard for me to say like when we're going to see like a really like a kind of recognizable Bitcoin or blockchain future that we're all like we're all kind of in this. I got into this space to chase that and make that dream happen. I have no idea. I'm just saying that. I have no idea.
Please don't bring up Thanksgiving. 6 to 9K last Thanksgiving.
Oh, God.
It's coming up. I'm like, oh, man.
I think the one thing I'll add that might be completely out of pocket, but it's just like the same way Facebook kind of realized that not owning its own platform was a big detriment to its ability to, just having its own control, right? With Apple being able to say, hey, you can't track users on Apple, even now going up against Spotify and other apps on the platform, just having a gatekeeper, right? And I think with crypto and it being purely software, you do have to worry about things. It's like, how do you increase adoption? Do you want it to be, you want to make it easier, like Apple Pay, to make micropayments, right? Then you have to go through Apple. You have to go through whatever company or organization that has control of that platform or the actual hardware device, and that's why you see like Facebook rushing. I think the reason why they're rushing to Metaverse and Oculus is because of that. They want to own some type of hardware where they own the platform themselves. They can control kind of like their distribution. So I think a risk that might not be there because these bigger companies seem to be open to crypto and blockchain, but that's definitely something to keep in mind. And I'm gonna, if you guys want to leave one more statement before we end
Just
this.
on the payments, I would say the next wave of payments is payments through broadband and radio waves. Yeah, and that can be the next wave. That could be the next consensus process. I don't know. It's a good idea.
Yeah, I think, I'm gonna switch, but like, it's a really fun space to work in. I definitely recommend, trying to get involved, exploring at least how you can. And I think what's cool about it, as you saw on the panel, like a lot of people in the space are really passionate about what they do, and there's a lot of really exciting problems to solve. So.
My closing thoughts would be obviously stick with Texas blockchain, learn, go through the ropes, learn from the people people around you. Find good mentors and people that want to help you. The crypto space can be a lot, and I feel like you could be drinking from a fire hose, but ultimately, everyone has a bit of that imposter syndrome where it's like, hey, I don't know what I don't know, and just kind of keep learning and keep iterating on your skill set. Especially as students, you're in a very unique position to pretty much have free reign to talk to whoever you want and go to people and say, I want to learn from you. Please tell me everything you know. As someone that's graduated, it is very hard for me to go to somebody and say that because they're like, what the hell are you trying to sell me? I don't want to talk to you. So use that to your advantage as students, and beyond that, just keep trying to further the skills.
And it's not a lot of, we're not going to get an opportunity like this to be a part of something this early and being able to build the future. So like they said, take full advantage. But that concludes our third speaker panel. If we give a round of applause. Y'all are free to stick around till 7:30. Just, come and talk to them, come and talk to us. But thank you, and see y'all next week.
Thank you. Thanks for the questions.